To declare a tuple, we set a variable equal to a comma-separated series of values or variables. So here on line 2, we create a tuple called myTuple and assign it 3 values, 1, 2, and 3. Its first value is 1, and remember Python is 0 indexed, so it identifies that first value as the 1 at location 0. 2 is the first value, and 3 is the second value. Then on line 4, we print the tuple, and we see exactly what we expect, the exact same thing we declared. Here we've declared our tuple with values themselves, 1, 2, and 3. But we can also declare our tuple with variables. So here on lines 1, 2, and 3, we create 3 variables and give them 3 values. They just so happen to match our ones from before. And then on line 7, we create my tuple again, this time passing in our 3 variables. The current values of those variables become the values of our tuple. So when we print the tuple, we see those values. So really, a tuple is just like any other variable. You have a variable name, and it has some values. It just so happens that the values have a little bit of structure to them. There can be more than one value, and we access them based on their indices. Note also you don't actually have to use these parentheses when creating a tuple. You could leave them off. I always use them just because it re-emphasizes the underlying organization of the code, and I would encourage you to do so as well. They never hurt, and sometimes they help. Now, tuples can have multiple data types within them. For example, we could create a single tuple with a string, a float, and an integer. So here we define a string, a float, and an integer, and on line 7, we create the same tuple. The only difference is that the data types of those 3 variables are now 3 different data types. But the tuple remains unchanged, at least compared to what we would expect based on the values we passed into it. It still has a string representing hello world, a float representing 5.1, and an integer with the value 5. This follows Python's general procedure of being what we call loosely typed. Python never really cares about what data types you're using until you try to do something that you can't do, like multiplying a string by a float. But we can see that in action here. Imagine if down here we ran some code that would check, for example, the length of each item in the tuple. There's nothing wrong with checking the length of each item in the tuple, except that the float and the integer don't have lengths. So it wouldn't crash until we tried to do something on a value in the tuple that we can't do. This general flexibility is also different from many programming languages out there. Many languages require that every item in a particular list be of the same type. Python, however, doesn't. That's because it doesn't check types until you actually run the code, and so it really can't know until you try whether or not every item in a list is of the same type.